Shortly after the British Grand Prix, there were 2 earthquakes within a few days on different sides of the world. On the 13th of July, a 6.6 magnitude tremor took place deep beneath the Hindu Kush and Pamir mountains near the Afghan-Soviet border. Hundreds of miles away, on the borders of the Tajik and Kyrgyz republics of the USSR, a group of 45 mountaineers were preparing to climb Lenin Peak when the shaking dislodged snow, leading to a catastrophic avalanche that swept away the base camp, killing 43 of the climbers, including 23 members of the Leningrad Mountaineering Club, along with 6 Czechoslovakian climbers, 4 Israelis, 2 Swiss and a Spaniard, along with others from around the USSR. It remains the joint worst mountaineering disaster in terms of lives lost, along with the 2014 Nepal snowstorm disaster. 2 days later, a far more destructive quake struck the island of Luzon in the Philippines, a 7.7 magnitude event, which produced a 125-kilometre-long crack in the ground and over 1,600 deaths, over 3,500 injured, and over 126,000 left homeless. The Philippines archipelago sits on a complex region of tectonic plates and often suffers earthquakes, but the 1990 quake particularly affected isolated mountain resort Baguio, which was packed with holidaymakers and isolated from the outside world for 48 hours when the damage rendered its airport runway unusable, restricting rescue efforts to helicopters alone. The tall, cheaply built concrete buildings that made up the resort were particularly susceptible to the seismic damage. There was, meanwhile, another country having its first free elections, Mongolia. While it had been off the radar compared to the revolutions sweeping Europe, Mongolia had had its own pro-democratic revolutions during early 1990. The country had been a Soviet satellite for much longer than most others, going back to 1924, as a one-party state, which had, among other things, suppressed traditional Mongolian script in favour of Cyrillic writing and built modern cities, industries and education to replace the traditional nomadic way of life. Protests against the government began in late 1989 and developed into hunger strikes in March, which finally led to the resignation of the Politburo and the holding of elections in the summer of 1990. To the surprise of many, the Mongolian People's Party, the incumbent communists, who'd taken a leaf from their European counterparts and abandoned strict Marxist-Leninist doctrine in favour of a softer democratic socialism, won the election by some distance, taking 358 of the 430 seats in the People's Grand Chorale and 31 of the 50 seats in the Little Chorale. In America, President Bush signed into law the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, which was designed to prevent discrimination based on disability, covering both physical and mental disabilities. It was modelled on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which had made the same provision for discrimination based on race, sex, religion, and national origin, among others. The ADA had broad bipartisan support, though it was opposed by some business leaders who argued that it would cost too much to make accommodations, and by some conservative evangelicals who opposed its protections for HIV-positive people. In Port of Spain, the capital of the Caribbean nation of Trinidad and Tobago, 42 insurgents from the radical group Jamaat al-Muslimin stormed the parliament. The group had been conducting a campaign against the illicit drugs trade in the mid-80s, which had enabled them to gain grassroots support, as well as recruiting among the disaffected youth of the city. The government had hit back, raiding their communes, seizing weapons and arresting several members, with leader Yassin Abu Bakr charged several times with contempt of court and illegal demonstrations. On the 27th of July it all came to a head, and the group staged a coup d'etat, taking the Prime Minister A.N.R. Robinson and most of his cabinet hostage and taking over the TV and radio stations. Despite Abu Bakr's appeal for calm, there was widespread looting, but the Trinidadian army did not join the coup, and after a siege lasting 6 days and leading to the deaths of 24 people, including one MP, the insurgents were persuaded to surrender in exchange for amnesty. And following the Arab summit earlier in the year, Iraqi diplomatic pressure was increasing on Kuwait, which they now accused of drilling diagonally under the border to steal their oil, overproducing oil to sink the price, which was affecting Iraqi exports, and conspiring with the US to undermine Saddam Hussein's government. And many Iraqis also felt that Kuwait should always have been part of Iraq anyway, seeing it as an artificial country created by the British post-World War I. In late July, Iraqi troops were now observed to be massing near the border. US Ambassador April Glaspie asked the Iraqi government to explain, but said that the US has no opinion on Arab-Arab conflicts and that the US wouldn't start an economic war against Iraq. And in San Diego, comedy actress Roseanne was invited by her studio boss Tom Werner to sing the national anthem between games at his baseball club, the San Diego Padres. It didn't go well. To be fair, it's not the easiest venue for even the most accomplished singer, with a delay on the feedback and a stadium of boos, whistles and other noise, but what people mostly objected to was the fact that she didn't seem to be taking it remotely seriously, an impression not helped by her grabbing her crotch and spitting on the ground at the end in what she explained was supposed to be a parody of baseball players. The Hockenheim circuit in West Germany had been refurbished a bit since last year, with the pit lane and start-finish straight both widened and the pit and paddock facilities spruced up. The Monteverdi team, Onyx now officially dropped from the team name, had completed their unhappy move to Switzerland, to Binningen, a suburb of Basel to be precise, and the Coloni team swept out the remainder of the Subaru experiment, returning to their all-over yellow colour scheme and Ford DFR engines, hoping to draw a line under the first half of the season. They were reporting that the DFR was over 100 kilos lighter than the Subaru, but that brought its own problems as the chassis was balanced, such as it was, for the Subaru, and the engine cover was now the wrong shape. There were a few other car modifications since Silverstone, though McLaren did have a slightly revised cowling cover to reduce wind buffeting on the drivers' heads, and a more powerful evolution of the V10 Honda. Elsewhere, the silly season rumours were beginning to start, with Tyrrell allegedly to lose the services of designer Harvey Postlethwaite, aerodynamicist Jean-Claude Migiot, and team manager Juan Villadel-Prat at the end of the year, as well as Jean Alesi, who everyone agreed would probably be snapped up by a bigger team. Lotus, as ever, were in trouble, a third year of failure, allegedly now the last straw for R.J. Reynolds, who had continued plastering the car in their camel livery through thin and thinner since the departure of Ayrton Senna. Now there was talk that the Chapman family would wind the team up altogether if the Camel sponsorship was lost, though there were also rumours of a management buyout. Alain Prost had let it be known that he was planning to retire from Formula One at the end of 1991, while Ayrton Senna's contract with McLaren expires at the end of 1990, and the rumours were that he was looking for a one-year extension with a view to replacing Prost at Ferrari in 1992. But that Ron Dennis was insisting on a 2-year deal, which would mean that the prancing horse had to wait until 1993. Jean Alesi was hotly tipped to replace Mansell at Ferrari and was also strongly linked with Williams, while Ken Tyrrell was said to have turned down a $1.25 million contract buyout from someone. Another driver linked with Ferrari, of course, was talented Italian Ivan Capelli, who was really not being well served by his car at the moment. Pre-qualifying got underway on Friday morning as usual, with the Larousse team replaced by their fellow Frenchman Ligier, the team dropping into PQ for the first time, but both drivers were veterans of the early morning sessions, and the blue cars had the unusual experience of being the fastest thing out there briefly as they topped the timings, with Guiar making it 8 out of 9 pre-qualifications in third, and Dalmas fourth in the AGS. Tarquini was nearly a second off his teammate, with Moreno another 8/10ths behind after missing most of the session while his car was rewired. Gachot's Coloni was faster than Langes's second Eurobrun, though that wasn't a major achievement, and a spin for Gachot didn't help, with Giacomelli as usual way off the pace, 25 seconds off Alio and 20 off the next slowest car. Friday qualifying proper saw the McLarens top of the heap by a considerable margin, with Prost's third place time in the Ferrari some 1.6 seconds off Senna's fastest time in the McLaren. The Woking Wonders then spent all Saturday working on their race setup rather than setting any qualifying times, and despite everyone else's best efforts, Prost's third place time after Saturday was still 1.5 seconds off Senna and 1.3 seconds off Berger, with Mansell next and complaining that his engine was down on power compared with Prost's, followed by the Williams twins, then Piquet and Alesi, Tyrrell still doing unexpectedly well on a power circuit. Nannini was ninth after a terrifying shunt on Friday necessitating a new carbon fibre tub being flown out from Whitney. alongside Capelli, 10th on the grid and a whopping 4.15 seconds off pole, with Suzuki and Bernard celebrating the Larousse team getting out of PQ on row 6, followed by Nakajima and Gugelmin in the second Tyrrell and the second Leightonhouse. The Lowtie were still seemingly in deep trouble, 16th and 20th on a track that should have suited their V12 engine, split by Modena and the two Arrowses. David Brabham made the grid again in 21st, as did both Ligier's and both Monteverdi's, with Guier and Dalmas joining frequent non-qualifier Barilla, and for the first time in 1990, De Cesaris in watching from the sidelines on Sunday. Prost, unhappy with his car, opted to start in the T-car, but had the engine and gearbox moved over from his usual race car, while Alboreto would also start in the spare Arrows, after setting off his fire extinguisher on the way around to the grid and having to pull back in and hurriedly swap over. Other than that, everything looked fine as the cars made their way round the parade lap under blue skies in hot weather. Away they went, and as the two McLarens sprinted away, a wheel went flying further back and Pirot's Dallara went backwards into the pit wall, accompanied by Philippe Alliot. After the marshals unbuckled the Frenchman's straps, then rebuckled them at his request, the Frenchman was pushed clear and got moving again, only to be black flagged later for receiving outside assistance, but Pirot was still in the car and looking like he was in pain. As the leaders went round the long lap in grid order, the medical car was still in attendance on Pirot, and the yellow flags were out as Senna approached the stadium complex. Pirot and co were sufficiently off the line that the decision was taken not to stop the race, while Emanuele was carefully extracted from his car complaining of back and neck pain, put in a precautionary neck brace and sent off to the medical centre, accompanied by his wife Marlena. Replays would later show that Stefano Modena had got away slowly with a slipping clutch, and David Brabham, in taking avoiding action, had clipped the Dallara, tipping him into the accident. So, with the yellow flags waving around the stadium, any overtaking would have to be done out in the forests, as the McLarens and Ferraris began drawing away from fifth-place Patrese, while Boutsen had dropped behind the two Benettons with gear selection problems. Piquet was, mostly off-camera, climbing all over the back of Patrese's Williams, and his frustration got the better of him on lap 11 as he overshot the chicane and had to take the escape road, losing 6th to Nannini but staying ahead of a struggling Boutsen. 3 laps later it was Mansell's turn to come a cropper, suddenly slithering off the track on the approach to the Ostkurve before rejoining the track and heading slowly to the pits, passed by Patrese and Nannini, still going at it hammer and tongs between themselves. Before Mansell got there, Berger and Prost both peeled in for new tyres. The Goodyear technicians had advised that the softer C compounds should be good for the whole race, but the weather was much hotter than anticipated, so at about 1/3 distance the leaders started pitting for new boots. The Ferrari mechanics had a bit of trouble with the left rear and lost Alain time, but he got underway just as his teammate rolled straight into the garage. "What happened?" "I ran over something on the approach to the Ostkurve," he said, and had damaged his undertray. All of which meant Senna now led Patrese, Nannini and Piquet, all yet to stop, with Berger 5th and Boutsen 6th and likewise yet to stop. Senna came in next time around for a great stop, his old tyres blistered all over, and came out between Nannini and Patrese, who dropped behind his compatriot off-screen. But instead of quickly overtaking the Benetton, Senna seemed to stay behind and even drop back a bit, while behind him were Patrese, Piquet and Berger all running together. Patrese fairly slithered into the pit road on the next lap, while Nannini was still getting faster and pulling away from Senna. Not a bad performance from Ford's powerful little V8 in just its second race. Behind them, Berger was still clambering around the back of Piquet's Benetton. Wojtek spun his Monteverdi into the gravel just before half-distance, and a lap later Pierluigi Martini spluttered to a halt with a dead engine, the 10th retirement, after Alliot, Pirot and Modena on the opening lap, Donnelly having burned his clutch out on lap 1, Alboreto, Brabham and Gugelmin all having had engine failure, and then Mansell, Wojtek and Martini. It was becoming obvious that Benetton had chosen the B compound tyres and were going to run non-stop, so now Senna put his foot down and reeled Nannini back in, while on lap 24, just after half-distance, Piquet's copy of the Ford V8 let all of the magic smoke out and he parked up next to Martini's Minardi. Nakajima coasted in to retire in the pits with a dud Ford of his own, while Prost got past Boutsen into 4th, both cars not at their best. Prost's 7th gear kept tripping his rev limiter and overheating the engine, while Boutsen still had a dodgy gearbox. Nannini was quite happily lapping up front as the race entered its final third, with Senna apparently simply unable to do anything about him, and the pair were chased at a distance of about 5 seconds by Gerhard Berger. A frustrated Boutsen pitted for tyres from 5th at about 2/3 distance to see if that helped matters. It didn't. The team dropped the left rear wheel nut and had to go get another, the resulting long stop dropping him to 9th. So that made the top 6 on lap 30 of 45 Nannini, Senna, Berger, Prost, Patrese and Capelli, with Senna still apparently giving it 10/10 just trying to stay with Nannini. Boutsen, the red mist down, put in the fastest lap, while at the front Nannini's tyres were finally starting to go off and Senna had caught back up again, and on lap 34 slipstreamed past into the lead and soon began pulling away, while Nannini was just hoping he could hang on to second from Berger, currently about 8 seconds behind him. Both Lolas retired from 7th and 8th within a couple of laps, Suzuki's clutch and Bernard's fuel pump the culprits, but otherwise the closing stages were the story of 2 charges. Berger's pursuit of Nannini for second, and Boutsen's chase of Capelli for the last point now that the Lolas were out of his way. Alesi pulled in with a broken CV joint with 4 laps to go, while Leto was running 6 laps adrift in the sole remaining Monteverdi after having hit a curb and damaged a steering arm and having his engine cover flapping in the breeze. Senna swept home to take the win, with Nannini hanging on to second by, in the end, a relatively comfortable 2 seconds. Berger finished 8.5 seconds behind his teammate and nearly 30 ahead of an ailing Prost, with Patrese 5th and Boutsen getting the last point, his first fastest lap, and being the last man on the lead lap. Capelli, Warwick, Caffey and Larini were next, with Alesi qualified 11th and Leto unclassified but still doggedly running at the end. It was Senna's 24th career win, putting him level with 5-time champion Juan Manuel Fangio, though since Fangio had only entered 52 races, it would take Senna some going to match his almost 1-in-2 win ratio. The 9 points also took him back to the top of the table, with Berger solidifying his 3rd place overall ahead of Boutsen and Piquet.